Okay. Recorded. Cool. Hi, Myra. Hi, Mommy. I don't hear anyone, but hi, Tali.
Good.
Good. That's good. Hello, everybody. Yapa. What's up? Hi, Araceli. It's so funny over Zoom because I'm seeing you all, but
Malka, to see you in Yerushalayim is special.
I know I was considering doing it on the porch, but it's so loud. Like I was nervous it would just be too loud. So
Can you show us Jerusalem for a moment?
There's no window in this room.
Oh, okay.
But no, there's just so much construction that like it would be too loud.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we feel so special to be able to hear these words and learn Torah from the hills of Jerusalem. It takes on a deeper meaning. Ethics of our fathers, our sages, they all lived in the place that you are right now. And a lot of these messages were written and came from the hills of Jerusalem. So I think this class will be even more meaningful. And thank you so much for sharing with us and teaching us, Malka. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mom. Okay, I guess we'll begin. Thank you all for logging on. It's so special. I always say this, but I think it's so special that we can learn together from all over the world, really. And even during COVID, like, didn't matter where we were, we continued to our learning regardless. That's the blessing of technology. So it's so good to see you all. Miss the Palm Beach community so much. Hopefully we'll see you all in Israel soon. So today we're going to be continuing with Pirkei Avot. I know my mother began last week. I always just preface by saying, if anyone has any questions, comments, anything you disagree with, or you don't feel like I explained fully, please unmute yourself and share. I love when these classes are as interactive as possible. So if you really have anything to share, I would really appreciate that. And I think it's so important to learn from each other, not just to hear my own voice. But yeah, thank you all for joining. So last week, I believe my mother did the first chapter of Pirkei Avot. And today we're going to be delving into the second chapter, and maybe we'll contrast it a little bit with the first. So Myra, am I able to share my screen? Yay. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly because I just think it's really great to have like a visual of the text. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah? Okay. I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. So I just think it's good to see the text that we're going to be delving into, because there's so many nuances within the text that you can read Pirkei Avot and like just be blown away by how amazing these ideas are. And then if you stop and focus on the actual text, there's so much depth behind every word, and like different commentaries will read them in different ways, and you can learn so many things from it. So I think it's a good visual. And also to, see some of the Hebrew, and maybe we'll read through some of it. So today we're going to be focusing on chapter 2. The first Mishnah of chapter 2 on its own already has like so much that we can learn from. So we're going to be delving into different parts of it. So I'll read it in Hebrew and then we'll translate it. But I divided this Mishnah into 3 parts. So we'll go through each one. So I guess let's go right into it. Again, if anyone has any questions, like please unmute yourself. Okay, so the Mishnah chapter 2 begins. It says, Rabbi Omer, Ezehi derech yeshara sheyavar lo ha'adam. which means Rebbe says, which is the proper path for a person to choose for oneself. Kol shehi tiferes la'aseh, the tiferes lo min ha'adam. Whatever brings beauty to the person that does it and is beautiful to mankind. So on the surface, what this Mishnah is saying is that the best path, the best way to conduct yourself is in a way that's beautiful for yourself and beautiful for the people around you. So this Mishnah was written by Rebbe. Anytime the Mishnah says Rebbe, instead of saying a specific rabbi's name, it's referring to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who was the author of the entire Mishnah. So many times the Mishnah is going to quote other rabbis. But if the Mishnah just says Rebbe without giving a name, it's referring to the author of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. So he begins this chapter by saying these words. And if we look at the Hebrew text, again, the word for beautiful in Hebrew is tiferes. And that is a loose translation because, in fact, tiferet is a lot deeper than just beauty. And I'll explain why. So in Kabbalah, there's this concept of sfirot. I'm sure some of you have heard of this before. We've discussed it before in previous classes. But Tiferet is the third of the sfirot. What are the first two? It goes chesed, which we loosely translate as kindness. The second one is gvura, which we loosely translate as discipline or strength. And the third one is Tiferet, which is beauty. As we see here, the word Tiferet means beautiful. But really what this word means is it's a fusion of chesed and gvura. So chesed is kindness, which is the attribute of giving. And it's not just giving, it's giving without limitation. It's giving without self-restraint. And gevura is the exact opposite. It's holding back, it's withholding yourself, it's discipline, and it's self-regulation. And then tiferet is the fusion of these two. And the reason it's translated as beauty is because beauty is when two things come together and synergize. What does that mean? What makes a painting beautiful? If you had a canvas and you just use the color red, it wouldn't be beautiful because you only have one color. When an artist takes different colors and he merges them together, that's what creates a masterpiece. So too with the sfirot, chesed is on the right. We say that the right hand is chesed, and that's one extreme, being totally giving and totally with no boundaries, with no limitations. That would be chesed. And of course, this could be taken to an extreme where a person, doesn't know how to stop or doesn't know how to self-regulate. And then gevura is the opposite extreme. It's when a person has too much restraint and too much control. And they don't know when to, have that compassion to let go a little bit. And so tiferet is a beautiful merging of these two sfirot. It's chesed and gevura combining together. And so on a deeper level, what this part of the Mishnah is saying is that the proper path is tiferet. Chesed could be taken to one extreme, gevura could be taken to the other extreme. But tiferet is the perfect fusion of both. And so when a person can identify, some people, sometimes we take like personality tests, you could see like what your personality is like, but most people can identify, am I more of a chesed person or am I more of a gevura person, right? Some people are more towards the giving side and, less discipline. And some people are more towards the discipline side, very like structured and very self-disciplined. And sometimes that can, be a little harsh. And so what Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi here is saying is that we need to merge both of them. We need to know when to use chesed and when to use gevura. And if we can have tiferet, which is like the perfect unity of these two attributes, that's when a person has reached the proper path, that you take both sides and combine them. And so if a person has, identifies that I'm a little bit more on the chesed side, you can work on gevura. And if a person is more gevura, which is strength and discipline, they can work more on the chesed side of themselves, the kind part of themselves, and try to reach that equilibrium of tiferet. So another thing that this Mishnah is teaching us is that when a person creates this, has this like tiferes, right? That's how they can internalize their strengths, right? If a person is to either extreme, it's a little unhealthy. Tiferes is like the middle road. And so it's saying that the proper path is the middle road, not to be to either extreme. Okay. So the second part of this Mishnah continues, and it says that Hevezir b'mitzvah kala kevachamura, which means be as careful with a minor mitzvah as with a major one. She'ein ata yodea matan shacharan shal mitzvahs, for you don't know the reward given for each of the mitzvahs. V'have machashev hapased mitzvah keneged shachara, and calculate the cost of a mitzvah against its reward. Ushchar avera keneged hafseda, and the reward of a sin against its cost. So there's a story of a man living in the 15th century, and he was imprisoned by the king, and he was sentenced to life in prison. And the king granted him 1 day of freedom. He said you could choose any day on the calendar to go free. And so this Jewish man excitedly wrote a letter to his rabbi, and he said, which day should I choose? So he said, maybe I should choose Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. Maybe I should choose Rosh Hashanah, the day where I can go out and hear the shofar. And then he said, maybe I should choose Passover. Then I can have a Seder with my family. I can eat the matzah. And he wanted advice. Which day is the best to choose to go free? And the rabbi answered him and said, you should choose the day that is as soon as possible. Don't wait till Yom Kippur. Don't wait till Passover. Don't wait till Rosh Hashanah. If you could go free today, go free today. Because you don't know which mitzvah is more important than the other. Every single day, there are opportunities to do mitzvot. And instead of waiting for those big days, for those big mitzvot, rather take advantage of the mitzvah that is right in front of you. So if you can go free tomorrow and you could do the mitzvah of the day, if you could pray in a synagogue and you can give charity and do all the mitzvot of a regular, average Tuesday, that's the day you should choose. And it reminds me of a quote that says, the most important moment is this moment right in front of you. The most important person is the person standing right in front of you. And the most important place is the place where you are right now, because every moment we're living in the moment. You can't live in the past. You can't change the past. And worrying about the future doesn't help either. So the most important thing is to live in the moment. And the rabbi was saying the mitzvot of that moment are what's most important. And so this Mishnah is teaching us on the surface, we'll delve a little deeper in a moment. But what this Mishnah is saying is that every single mitzvah is important, and we don't know which one we can't decide which mitzvah is more important than the next. And so treat every mitzvah with the same enthusiasm as you do what the big mitzvah, right? Yom Kippur, the big holidays, the very impactful and large mitzvot. You should treat the tiny coin that you give to charity should be as important to you as those big momentous occasions. But there's, on a deeper level, if we look closely at the text, it seems like this Mishnah has a contradiction. And I think what the contradiction is that it's telling us not to categorize the mitzvah, right? It's saying, don't consider one mitzvah as more important than the other. Yet the Mishnah itself, look at the text, it says that there are minor mitzvot and there are major mitzvot. So which one is it? Are some mitzvot more important than others? Because seemingly, according to the text, it says that there are minor mitzvot and there are major mitzvot. And it continues to say that you should calculate the cost of a mitzvah against its reward, which means that certain mitzvot have bigger rewards than others. So doesn't that indicate to us that some mitzvot are more important than others? And so the Rebbe has a beautiful explanation, and he explains what is the answer to this question. Are there some mitzvot that are more important than others? Or is it that we should consider all mitzvot as being equal? So firstly, the Rebbe explains what is the essence of a mitzvah. So the word mitzvah, let's see, let's do some chat. I like using the chat. What does the word mitzvah mean? Does anybody want to write in the chat or unmute yourself and just say it like that? What is the word mitzvah mean? What's a mitzvah? Let's see.
It's a commandment. And it's taking an action. But it also means, which is so beautiful, it means on another level means connection. So that every time we're doing a mitzvah, we're really making connection to Hashem.
Beautiful. Tali, thank you so much. You hit the nail on the head, as they say. So exactly what Tali said, we often translate mitzvah as commandment, but that's a loose translation. That's not the literal translation. The word mitzvah, as Tali just pointed out, comes from the word savtza, which means connection. And so the essence of a mitzvah is that it is a connection with God. Every single mitzvah is another point of connection. And so God, just like a father, let's say you have a parent that wants to have a connection with their child. What is the connection between an adult and a child, right? Adults are mature. They think about mature ideas and concepts, and children are simple-minded and they haven't matured yet. So how does a parent, how does a teacher, how does an educator connect with a little child? Seemingly they have nothing in common, right? Children don't think on the same level as adults. Children can't do the things that adults do, and adults don't really care for the things that children do. So how can we create a connection between an adult and a child? When an adult wants to connect to a child, they find something in common, something that they need that the child can accomplish. So a lot of times a teacher will say, do you want to be my teacher's helper? And that's like the biggest, the kid feels so connected to that teacher because they have something that they can contribute to the teacher. Or, a lot of times you bake with children, you say, you could put the flour in, you could put the sugar, and the kid feels so useful and so connected because they have something that they can contribute to you as the adult. And so too, obviously we can't compare an adult and a child to God and a human being. It's incomparable. God is infinite and we are completely finite. But when God wants to connect with us, how does an infinite God connect to finite beings? God is infinite. Seemingly there's no connection between us human beings and God. But the truth is God gave us 613 mitzvot, commandments. And really what a mitzvah is a way up for us to connect to God. God is saying, if you want to connect with me, if you want to have a relationship with me, this is what you should do. And so every single mitzvah connects us with God. And as Tali pointed out. And so on that level, from that perspective, there's no difference between one mitzvah and the next. Every single mitzvah connects us with God in a very special way. And we can't say coming to shul on Yom Kippur or eating matzah on Passover connects us with God more than a small mitzvah, giving a coin to charity, or choosing the kosher food over the non-kosher food. Those things are all points of connection with God. And so it doesn't matter if we think in our head, this mitzvah is bigger than that mitzvah, or this mitzvah is more challenging. Sometimes we think because a mitzvah is more challenging, maybe it's more important. But the truth is actually that every mitzvah, big or small, is a connection with God. And so from that perspective, there's no difference between one mitzvah and the next. They all connect us with God equally. And yet, what is the purpose of a mitzvah besides the fact that it connects us with God? Why did God choose these specific actions, right? God could have chose anything to connect with us. Why did he choose these specific 613 commandments? Because these 613 commandments are 613 different ways for us to refine ourselves, for a human being to refine themselves, to refine their portion in this world. And so from that perspective, there is a difference between mitzvah because every mitzvah refines us in a different way. So giving charity cultivates our generosity, and Ahavat Yisrael, loving your fellow Jew, cultivates compassion, and Shabbat cultivates other parts of our spiritual life and our relationship with God, our relationship with our family. Prayer is what cultivates our spirituality and our feeling of connection with God. So every mitzvah is a different way to refine ourselves and to refine the world around us. And so from that perspective, in fact, there is a difference between each mitzvah because each mitzvah refines us in a different way. And so the truth is that it's both. We have to consider every mitzvah as being equally important because every mitzvah connects us with God equally. And so we can't discriminate and say this mitzvah is more important than another mitzvah. But we also have to remember that there are certain mitzvot that refine us in a certain way, and other mitzvot refine us in a different way. And therefore, every mitzvah is unique. Does anyone have any comments or questions? I'll just stop and see if everyone's following. If anyone has any ideas they'd like to share, that would be
You were
great.
saying, hi.
Hi, let me stop share so that I can see you all. Let's see. There we go. Yes. Hi.
So you were, hi, how are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
Me too.
You were saying that a mitzvah is a connection,
Yes.
and I was just wondering, the way that I interpret it was like a good deed, so I didn't know like what the difference or what even like the word deed kind of.
What? Sorry?
What the word deed, like a good deed, I was wondering what the definition of that is and how it relates to like a connection.
So we usually will say like a mitzvah is a good deed. And a lot of times, when we teach children, we'll say like a mitzvah is a good deed because it's hard to, this is a more like, a very specific, more deeper understanding of what a mitzvah is. But really most mitzvot are good deeds, right? They are also good deeds, but really a mitzvah, the word mitzvah comes from the word connection. And that's the idea of a mitzvah that connects us with God. But of course, a mitzvah is also a good deed. So the translation is not like inaccurate. It's just not as specific, it's a mitzvah, like giving charity is a good deed, of course, not a question. But, it was given to us by God as a commandment because it's a good deed and it refines us and it refines the world. And also because it's a way for us to connect with God. So really the idea here is that mitzvot have both aspects. They have the aspect of being a good deed, right? We need to give charity because it's the right thing to do, because it refines our character and it gives to a person in need. And that's our responsibility in this world, to give to others. But another part that we can't lose sight of when we do a mitzvah, that it's a commandment from God, right? And we keep Shabbat. This is actually an important idea when it comes to all mitzvot. Samantha, thanks for bringing this up, that all mitzvot have beautiful outcomes, right? Shabbat is a beautiful time to spend with our family. A lot of times people talk about the beautiful outcomes of mitzvot, like Shabbat is family time and it's time to reconnect with your kids and, eat good food and connect with other people at the synagogue. But we can't lose, and all those things are true, not a question. Of course, a mitzvah is a deed and those things are true, but that's not the essential reason why we essentially mitzvot are connecting us with God. Yeah. And we have to also keep that in mind when we do a mitzvah, that this act is connecting me with God. It's cultivating my relationship with God, which is a really important thing to keep in mind when we do mitzvot. Yeah. So we'll go into the third part of the Mishnah now to see. One more point that I wanted to bring out. I'm not sure which Mishnah my mother spoke about last week, but something that's interesting.
The first Mishnah, Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai.
Perfect. Look at that. That works out really perfectly. So last week, my mother spoke about the first Mishnah of the first chapter. And she went through, the Mishnah says that Moses gave the Torah to Joshua, and Joshua gave it to the elders, and the elders gave it on to the prophets. And it goes through the inheritance of how the Torah was passed on from generation to generation. And I missed this point. We'll go back to the first line of this Mishnah, just because I missed it over, and I think it's a really powerful idea. So it says, which is a proper path for a person to choose for oneself? But one of the commentators that I read actually reads this sentence in a different way. So he takes the question mark, and instead of putting the question mark after oneself, he puts the question mark after which is a proper path. And the answer to the question is for a person to choose for oneself. So just to clarify, instead of the question being which is a proper path for a person to choose for oneself, the question is actually, according to this commentary, the question is, which is the proper path? And the answer is for a person to choose for oneself. What does this mean? That the proper path is for a person to choose for oneself the Torah and the mitzvot. So last week when my mother discussed the first Mishnah, and this is the difference between the first chapter of Pirkei Avot, just to bring it all together, the difference between the first chapter of Pirkei Avot and the second chapter of Pirkei Avot is that the first chapter begins with the way the Torah was passed down from generation to generation. So the idea there is that the Torah is our inheritance. It's a tradition that was passed down from Jews from the beginning, from Moses until today. And therefore we have this amazing gift from God, and it's like our duty and our responsibility to uphold it. And that's kind of the idea of the first Mishnah. And here the second chapter begins with the second step. Once a person has a foundation of this Torah was given to me by God, it was given to me by, my ancestors who got it from their ancestors, who got it all the way up to, Mount Sinai when God gave us the Torah. That has to be the foundation. But then a person can graduate to chapter 2, which says a person has to choose it for themselves. A person has to say, how does the Torah apply to me personally? Not as, a member of the Jewish nation as a whole, but me personally in my life, how does the Torah apply to me? And a person has to choose it for themselves. And the idea here is there's this concept of Kabbalat Ol, which means accepting the yoke of heaven, which means that God commands us to do the mitzvot, and we accept it because we are Jewish and because it's our inheritance and because we know that this is the essence of who we are as Jewish people. But you can't end there. If a person ends there, it's not going to be deep, it's not going to be meaningful, and it's not going to be personal because you're doing it not from an internal place, but more from an external place. And so this Mishnah is saying a person has to choose it for themselves. A person has to say, this is my gift from God, right? It's not just that it was handed down to me from all these ancestors, but it's actually something that is relevant to me today. And I'm going to choose it in my life because it's important and because it is relevant to me. And sometimes that takes a little more effort. We have to delve a little deeper and say, how is this mitzvah applicable to me? How does it speak to me? And everyone has a different part of Judaism that's going to speak to them more. Some people have like a special mitzvah that really relates to them or resonates with them. And that's really important to find your part in Judaism, in the Torah, to find yourself in the Torah really, and say, what do I connect with most? What can I do to make this more internal and more personal? So that's just the contrast between the first chapter, which was learned last week with my mother, and this chapter, which is like the second step of trying to make it more internal and more personal. All right, so that was the first line, and now we're going to skip down to the third line of this Mishnah. And so it says, this is actually one of my favorites. It's a really, I think it's a very empowering idea. It says, "V'histakel b'shlosha dvarim, v'iyata balidea avera." Reflect on 3 things and you will not come to sin. Okay, the three keys to not, falling into sin. What does it say? Da mala mala mimcha, know what is above you. Ayin ra'ah, an eye that sees, v'ozen shomat, and an ear that hears, v'chol masecha b'sefer nichtabin, and all of your actions are recorded in a book. And so this idea is not meant to scare us that there's, big brother watching. That's not the idea. It's not meant to intimidate us. It's actually really empowering. And the idea here is that your actions matter, right? No word goes unheard. No action goes unseen. Every single one of our actions, every word that we speak is important and it has an effect. And we should never, disregard the little things, right? That connects with the second part of the Mishnah where we said, don't think one mitzvah is more important than the other. So the same thing is true here. Every single word, every little thing that we do is significant and is important. And it's important to God. So the Alter Rebbe in the Tanya, chapter 41, he explains that before beginning to pray, a person should contemplate on the greatness of God. And the Alter Rebbe explains, what should a person think about? And he says, this is what a person should think about before you should really meditate on this idea or contemplate this idea before you begin to pray. And the idea, he says, you should think about how God created the entire world and all of the entire universe, all the celestial beings, all the different physical and spiritual worlds. God created them all. And yet, at the same moment, God is focused on you. He's specifically standing above you, focusing on you, and he's watching your actions, and he's thinking of, and he's focusing on your thoughts and your deeds. And it says that God is actually knows what's in your heart, and he knows what's in your mind, and he cares about what you do in every single moment. And this idea, again, is not to intimidate us, but it's actually to empower us and to make us realize that God cares about every little thing that we do. Nothing is too insignificant for God. And the same thing goes in life when we, sometimes we have struggles or problems and we think like, who am I? Like, does God actually care about me or my actions or my struggles? And the answer here is yes, of course. If God cares about every detail of creation, down to the tiny little leaf flowing from the tree, down to every little piece of the world is within God's consciousness and is important to God. And so this is meant to empower us to realize that my actions matter. And when I make a good choice, that matters to God. And, God is listening to the words that I speak. And so I should be careful not to speak negatively about other people and to only speak positive words, because my words have power. My words matter to God. If they didn't matter, he wouldn't be listening. And if my actions didn't matter, he wouldn't be recording them in a book. So the idea here is that we matter, our actions matter. And, it's really goes down to the details, that every little piece of this world is important to God and every piece of your life is important to God. And that's something that's really, it says that it holds a person back from sin because it empowers a person to realize how important they are in the scope of the world and how important they are to God. So that is the first Mishnah of chapter 2. If anyone has any ideas to share, I think that would be great. We can discuss this for a bit because I think it's really, we went through many different ideas, so it's good to try to make it relevant. Yeah, Miriam, do you want to share?
Yes, I see it from a different perspective.
Great.
When it says that God basically sees everything you do, hears everything you do, and it all goes in a book, that also is telling you that that not everything that you do or say is being judged, but that the patterns of your life and the entirety of your life will be judged.
Wow. That's really true. And that's so powerful. And I love opening it up for discussion for this very reason, because every single line in the Torah can be interpreted from so many different perspectives. And it's so fascinating to hear your perspective. I didn't even think of that. Every person thinks in a different way. And so that's such an important point, that are you trying to say that it's really like the pattern and like the projection of like what a person is continuously doing in their life?
It is. And it's also not necessarily forgiveness, but the compassion that God has for us, that we make mistakes and that we can learn from them and that we can move on. And this is not the end of our journey.
It's true. So true. And I think from that perspective, it's actually very positive, because you can say, when it says all of your actions are recorded in a book, that means if you slip up once, God knows who you are. God knows your past actions. He knows your thoughts. He knows your intentions. And so just because you made a mistake, don't be hard on yourself in that moment, because God knows your intentions. He knows what you have been working towards up until now. And don't let that set you back.
Right. And your job is to learn from your mistakes and move on.
Right.
And that's
And
where the concept of teshuvah comes in, repentance.
Yeah.
The idea that we can always, repent and learn from our mistakes and use them as building blocks and building stones to move forward, not hold us down.
Yeah, that's very true.
And the other thing that I wanted to say is about connections. We never really know the nature of our connection with God, because God is unknowable. But what we do know is the nature of our connections with people, with community, and with the world. And so when we are choosing our path, those are the kinds of connections that we need to consider.
Right. It's true. Meaning, especially that connects to the second part that we were saying, we don't know the impact of one mitzvah over the other.
Right.
And I think mitzvot, of course, there are two different types of mitzvot. There are mitzvot between man and God, and mitzvot between man and another man, or between two people. So especially when it comes to, this applies, the Mishnah was referring to mitzvot between man and God, of course, we can't say that Shabbat is more important than giving charity or any of the other mitzvot. Every mitzvah is significant. And the same thing goes with our interpersonal relationships. So you don't know the impact of, smiling to somebody on the street. That could have such a big impact. And you might think that doing this big favor for someone is really worth your time and effort, but smiling to someone on the street or being gracious to somebody at the grocery store doesn't really matter because that's so insignificant and small. But what this mission is teaching us is exactly that point, Miriam, that every single mitzvah is important. Every interaction can be looked at as an opportunity for connection and to do a good deed. And you really don't know the impact. There are so many stories that come to mind about people that did a small action, and then only years later down the line, they realize the impact that action had. And in the moment, they had no idea. And so this is happening constantly. We are interacting with different people, and we have no idea the impact we have on other people. And it could be for the positive and, God forbid, for the negative as well. So it's just an extra thought to keep in mind that all the things that we do can have an amazing effect positively or negatively, and more than we can even imagine, and more than we'll ever know. Sometimes you find out the consequence of your actions, and sometimes you just don't. But yeah, it's a good point.
Malka, it's interesting that you gave the example of just smiling to somebody, because smiling, there's no mitzvah to smile. You won't find one of the 613 mitzvot to smile. But last week, what we talked about is that Pirkei Avot is not about the mitzvot, it's beyond the letter of the law. So we gave the example of greet everyone with a pleasant countenance. That's Pirkei Avot. You won't find it as part of 613 mitzvot. Part of the 613 mitzvot is to give charity and honor your father and mother, but greet everyone with a pleasant countenance, that's beyond the letter of the law. And look how much more that can do for somebody. Like that famous story years ago where like the pay it forward in Starbucks with the coffee, where one car paid for the car behind him, that's like beyond the letter of the law. That's such kindness that to just smile at somebody and to greet somebody with a pleasant countenance. We don't know how much that could affect somebody else's life and their family as well. So yeah.
So true. That's very true. Yeah. And another passage from Pirkei Avot that I always remember, and it connects to that. This is just a rant. I mean, it connects, but it came to mind. I'm not even sure which chapter it's from. Maybe one of the future classes will cover it, but it also says, besides for the one that my mother just mentioned, that you should greet every person with a pleasant countenance, one of the lines of Pirkei Avot actually says, you should be the first person to greet another person. Don't wait for other people to greet you, but be the first one to greet. A lot of times, we say why didn't they smile at me? Or why didn't they say hi to me? It's like, maybe take the initiative, you should be the first one to, that's really what the mission is saying, you should try be the first one to greet another person. So it's like that same concept of smiling at people and being gracious. Yeah. All right. This is lovely. I like hearing everyone else's ideas. I guess before we conclude, if anyone else has any things they would like to contribute. Thank you all for logging on, taking some time out of your morning to stop and study some Torah together. As Jewish women, it's really empowering that we can all come together and learn Torah from our homes, from wherever we are. It's cool to see. Torah learning is accessible to all of us at every time and every place. You don't have to go somewhere special or do something unique. You could just log on your computer and fill your mind with beautiful teachings of the Torah. So I really appreciated this class. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Malka.
A great way to start our day. You know, it's early in the morning by us, but what time is it by you? 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock?
5:40.
5:40. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Malka, for teaching
Thank
us
you all.
this morning.
Awesome.
And
you, Malka.
see you all. If we don't see you over Shabbat, we'll see you next Thursday morning at 10.
Yes, God willing.
Okay,
Shalom,
God willing.
everyone.
Have a good Shabbos, Malka.
Thank you, Malka.
Good Shabbos, good Shabbos, Malka. Only peace.
Hi to
Thank you,
Hindi.
Holly. Thank you
Good
all for
job.
sharing.